Hello, I'm Scott Clover, and you're listening to the Intuitive Energy Podcast. This podcast series is about intuition, healing, and creating new energetic patterns that benefit you in your daily life. In my private practice, I help people heal from a diverse range of issues, including self-acceptance, trauma release, managing anxiety, emboldening self-worth, and creative expression. So it is a pleasure to introduce today my friends, New York City journalist, performing artist, playwright, and author of 3 novels, Mike Albo, an intuitive counselor, prolific blogger, and also the person I most enjoyed talking about superheroes with, the Empress of Astral Projection, Erin Pavlina. Here are brief synopsises of the books we are discussing today. Mike Albo's book, Another Dimension of Us, it's described as The Breakfast Club Meets Stranger Things in this thrilling science fiction story about teens from the past and the future who travel across the astral plane to save the ones they love. As bodies and minds converge in and across the astral plane, these friends race to save a member of their chosen family from a dangerous demon while uncovering potent realities about love, sexuality, and friendship. And the second book is the Astral Projection Guidebook, Mastering the Art of Astral Travel by Erin Pavlina. This how-to guide helps you learn how to astral travel. Would you like to walk through walls, fly around the world, reconnect with deceased loved ones? Full disclosure, both guests today are very dear friends of mine, and I'm honored to have them on together talking about their books, which both focus on astral projection, but from different perspectives. It's my pleasure to introduce both Mike Albo and Erin Pavlina today. Hi, you two.
Hi, Scott. Thanks for having me.
Hi, I'm so happy to be here, and I am so happy to talk with both of you. But I respect both your work so much, and it's so cool to have this time with you.
Well, thank you. As I said, both of you have written books on astral projection from different perspectives. And the thing I found most about being involved with Mike's project is that after reading his original screenplay or his original manuscript, I suggested he should check out Erin's book. Erin and I had been working together for years, and you were one of my first mentors more than a decade ago. Mm-hmm. And so I respect Erin's work, and she's one of the resident experts on astral projection. So I suggested Mike check out her book. And upon reading that, the two of them connected. And what I found most interesting was that the books both started very similarly.
Yeah, that was amazing to me because I think I was on my second draft when I was working with you, Scott. And just to be clear, Scott was one of my readers. In the young adult world, they're called authenticity readers. And I had a few other ones, but Scott sort of came from an intuitive perspective. And then he suggested I read Erin's book, which was so riveting, so clear about the practice, but also like can't put it down riveting. And what's so weird, Erin, is that you started projecting, if that's the right word, when you were 15, and my characters are all 15-year-olds. And then further on, you say, well, it's always easier for younger people to practice this because they're open to it.
Yes.
So that alone, I was just like, oh my God, my intuition, I guess, in this plot structure was correct. I was really happy to read that.
Yeah, and from my perspective, both Erin's book and your book start off with a group of friends in high school yearning for something more, understanding that they're an outlier, but yet there's something inside that, as I said, going inside to go outside. And so the beginning of Erin's book is about how faithful she was and devoted she was to the process and not giving up on it. And once you sort of released it, it came to you, right, Erin?
Yeah, I think I spent 3 years actively and consciously trying to astral project using every technique I could find in every book in the local library. And I couldn't find much on how to do it. And so I did give up. I thought it's just never going to happen. Maybe it's not even real. But I did stick with it in the back of my head, and I was already lucid dreaming. So I contented myself with just being able to control a dream. And then one night I woke up, January 7th, 1985, and there was a tug of war for my soul. Something was pulling me out of my body. It was so much more frightening than I ever imagined it would be. And so I resisted it. And it was a very difficult first experience. And then, of course, during that first week and a half, it just kept happening every night. And I thought I was, losing my mind. And I was very afraid to go to sleep because I knew I was going to wake up and feel myself being pulled. But I did finally find a mentor who was an accomplished astral projector. And our first 2-hour conversation just blew me away and made me feel safe, made me feel powerful, helped me understand what I was experiencing. And after that, I was like, oh, we're going to get this. And I became way more empowered, and it wasn't scary anymore.
Oh, that's great. The power of mentorship, especially when dealing with topics like we talk about, I think is super important. But also, what I was getting at earlier is the amitié, or the friendships that you both describe in your books between these young adults, and how important it was for them to feel accepted. Erin, how important it seemed in your writing to feel accepted by your peers and your friends that you reached out to.
Absolutely. There was nobody else in my high school that was even remotely interested, at least that I knew of, in paranormal practices or the occult or astral projection. So running into these people was a godsend for sure.
Right. And then very similarly, as I said, when I read the Michael's manuscript, he has a very similar opening situation in that he's got three characters who are yearning for more, and they find a book in the library.
Yes, they find a book. Well, there's characters from two different times, from 1986 and 2044, and they live in the same area of Virginia. And the groups of friends from both times are outcast. And I think similarly to the beginning of Erin's book, these are kids who are just sort of learning what they're doing. But, I take it pretty dramatically to the end, and, they get a little too over their heads in the astral world. And I take liberties with what happens in the astral world, because that's what you got to do when you're writing a novel. But from what I've read of Erin's book, and she's very careful about creating safety parameters and protective practices, these kids don't have that. Things get a little haywire for them. So if you're going to do it, read Erin's book before you do it. That's my suggestion to you.
And that's actually one of the reasons I wrote the book. I wrote it for my 15-year-old self who had nobody to ask these questions to, at least nothing in the books. I thought this is the guide I would have wanted to read at that age.
And it's funny, my original idea for this book, Erin, do you know Ophiel, this book, The Art and Practice of Astral Projection by Ophiel?
I don't think so.
Okay, Ophiel. There used to be this bookstore in Los Angeles called the Bodhi Tree Used Bookstore, and it was a bookstore of esoteric books. And every time I was in LA, I would go get a book there. And I've had this book of his since like 1998, and I've always had it in the back of my mind to use it somehow, or I was inspired by it. And then I started thinking about what would happen if someone uses a book to astrally project and turns their lives upside down. When I got it, it was a used book, so someone had used it and really used it. Like there were notes all over it and underlinings and red markings and stuff. It really fascinated me that someone was like really physically using this book to practice. And that's my inspiration. So in a way, I love the idea of the power of the book itself and the power of books in general. I love that you wrote this for your 15-year-old self, because I just love that trail of inspiration.
Yeah, I think it's cool that you were inspired by the concept of astral projection enough to want to write a story about it and to incorporate a fictional but mostly true to life version of astral projection. That's cool.
Yes, and Scott was helpful. Scott, you were very helpful with that. Your authenticity readers are there to sort of help you make sure you're portraying characters correctly. I have a Black girl character. I have a Filipina girl character. I have a Latin non-binary character. And so I had these readers give me, suggestions to help shape and make them authentic. And Scott's point was, well, I want the intuitive kid to feel that this is an authentic read. So he gave me a lot of suggestions about how I was portraying the astral world properly, even though it's fictionalized, of course. And I tried to do that. I did my research. So
Thank you. And that's what I like about being an authenticity reader for manuscripts about energy and what considered magical or spiritual issues, is if you get it right, people like us that are paying attention know that it's right. And we jive and we harmonize with the message because it's a true or authentic message or being represented correctly. And when it's not represented correctly, it makes us subconsciously twinge a little bit and say, oh, that's being misrepresented. So I look back on movies like Charmed or TV shows and things, look back and think, oh, they're not representing it well enough in that it's not authentic, it's entertaining, but it doesn't resonate with the truth. And so those people like us, intuitive teenagers that we were, I wanted it to resonate with them reading it. It's important for me when discussing energy matters in manuscripts and things for it to be as authentic as possible because the receiver receives it correctly.
And you brought a good point, though, about the entertainment industry, because it's painful for me to watch astral projection portrayed incorrectly. And also sometimes they portray it obviously as too scary, such as that movie Insidious, where that poor kid leaves his body and is lost in the further. I must say there is a further, but it's not that difficult to make your way back to your body. And so one of the big questions I get all the time is, if I leave my body, will something else take up residence in it and I can't get back? And it just doesn't work like that. Your astral cord, so to speak, is your placeholder, your bookmark to your body, and nothing can step into that while you are still alive.
Good to know.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's people's number one fear about astral projection is they're going to leave and not be able to get back. And partly that's Hollywood. There was that other show, Behind Her Eyes. Oof, I don't want to spoil the ending of that, but I got a lot of emails after that. Oh my God, can that really happen? No.
Yeah, I was not a fan of how they continued that trope. I agree with you on that.
It was great that they addressed the topic because it definitely brought more to people's awareness.
How do you think, in terms of what we talked about earlier, young adults absorbing this information as readily as they have? I mean, looking back to Harry Potter and now all these young adult novels about energetic and spiritual magical things, that's existed for as long as there have been nursery rhymes. But there seems to be an even more thirst for it now. Why do you two think that might be?
I'd like to think that young people are more open to the unseen or to things that other people might think are not real. I like to have respect for young people and their big imaginations. I felt more open when I was that age. But I also think for me, a gay kid growing up in the 80s, a terrible time to be gay, I yearned for another version of this world. Do you know what I mean? I went to the library to find other ways to live and other ways of expression. So I was very drawn to the occult when I was a 15-year-old, and also to poetry, which there's a lot of poetry in this book as well. These kids are all poets. So being able to see something new or something different than the way that the reality is, I think is very, very important, especially for young people.
And I do believe that the entertainment industry, and because we also have the internet now, it's become more widespread and more accessible. You can do a search on something and have hundreds of articles on it. One thing I do caution, though, with people who are young, teenagers, if you have depression or anxiety or some other situations, astral projection can be very enticing as a way to escape life, escape your problems. And so I do mention something about that in my book about who should not astral project. I do think it's important for people to know why they're doing it, why they want to do it, and to be very, very safe while doing it.
Right. Going back to that authenticity thing, I know I've had a few experiences in my life, being as intuitive as I am from a childhood perspective, and then again later in life, where I may have had what's called an OBE. Is that the right term, Erin?
Out-of-body experience,
An out-of-body experience. And then there's remote viewing, which is part of my job.
That's a mental projection where you're receiving images back to you.
Correct. And it can be over a time plane. It doesn't have to be in the moment. It can be from 1974. It depends on the client. But the few times I've left my body, I haven't felt like I live in Manhattan. And sometimes I went around the corner and I got to the pizza shop 2 blocks away and thought, I know the neighborhood. I don't need to go any further. And I came back into my body, feeling that cord and things like that. Some people are really drawn to this. Other people have it sort of instinctively happen and pull away from it. I think that would be more my case. And then other people would maybe strive to have to learn it.
Yes. Yeah. Learning it, having spontaneous experiences. Very different. I think in my book also, I mentioned that I consider an out-of-body experience to be something unintentional, but you are astral. You did leave your body and you are on the astral plane, but you're probably going to come back really fast because it's unexpected and it's probably a little scary. But for me, astral projection is consciously making the decision to explore the astral plane on your terms, in your time, and in your way. So that, to me, that's the difference.
So is it like going through a water slide and coming out the other side into a new reality? How does one channel this experience from your perspective?
I noticed right away that when I became astral, which is I separated from my body, that all my senses were a little bit different, but they were all still there. So even though I did not have my eyes with me, I could still see, I could still hear, but the sounds were different. They were crisper and clearer, and the vision was different. Certain things in my room would disappear, almost like they couldn't transfer over to that plane of existence. And then I would see other things that I couldn't see in my body that were maybe standing at the end of my bed. And one has to wonder, were they there the whole time and I just couldn't see them? Or did they come because I have entered into a realm now that I share with them? So I had to navigate all of that and determine, what was what, because you can fly around your house. You can fly around your bedroom and it'll look largely the same as it does for the most part. Or you can actually adjust your frequency and be on a different plane entirely, where you're not seeing your bedroom. You're in a different state entirely. You may encounter sounds like frequency sounds, energies, maybe a fear, maybe a complete love and light. You can sort of change the channel of where you're projecting to, which is why some people have negative experiences interacting with the lower vibrational entities. And some people have amazing, positive, wonderful experiences like going to the afterlife, let's say, and talking to deceased relatives or your spirit guides, angels, it's all channels. So the astral projection is like turning on the television, but then you decide what channel you're going to interact with.
Okay, so that leads me to a few questions. You said I leave my body. So where's the division? Or can you explain a little more about the division between the I and the me?
Yeah, when I leave my body, I look back at my body and I think, oh, this poor girl, that poor meat suit. Because in astral form, I feel great. I'm powerful. I'm expansive. I'm unstoppable. I'm pure energy and I'm pure consciousness. I feel way, way more conscious as an astral being than in my physical body, which is tethered to all of the molecules and DNA and atoms that the physical matter is created from. And so here in the body, I'm a little bit limited, but it's fine. We're used to it. We're humans. When I go astral, there's a freedom and a sense of infinity and expansiveness that is very exciting, enticing, and wonderful. So it's a fun place to visit, but you can't really live there.
Is the afterlife like the Cheesecake Factory? You go into there and you hang out in the afterlife and then you choose a different restaurant or store in the mall? Or are they separate or are they?
Yeah, to me, it feels more like a layer.
Okay.
I don't feel like I'm going to a separate place. I feel like I'm going to a different frequency. I'm going up or I'm going down. And so like in an elevator, the elevator doors open and now you're on the top floor. They close, now you're on the bottom floor when they open again. And you want to consciously push that button in the elevator to decide where you're going to go. Otherwise, you can easily be drawn downward into somebody else's frequency that you may not want to be at.
I think in your book and in other astral books that I've read, astral projection books I've read, there is the fundamental distinction between the lower planes and the higher planes, right?
Yes.
I don't know how many lower planes there are, if there's like a number or an infinite number, but there are lower planes where you might encounter, as you said, sort of low vibration entities. The higher planes are where angels and spirit guides might be.
Or celestial beings. Ascended masters.
So the kids, when they explore the astral plane, they have a spirit guide who meets them in the lower plane to take them up to the higher plane. And he's kind of a funny character. He's like a cereal mascot that they both know from their childhood. In my description, and I know this might not be exactly correct, but I tried to get around giving my own imagination to what the astral plane would look like by saying the rule was it comes through your brain and comes through your imagination. So these kids, their perception is what it makes it look the way it does. So their shared perception is quite important in it. And so they have this one character, this one weird cartoon mascot who becomes their spirit guide through the lower planes up to the higher plane.
Yeah, and I will say that spirit guides can bring you up from the lower plane to the higher plane. That's a very important thing to mention, is if you ever find yourself in a bad place, you can call out to your spirit guides or some angelic energies and ask them to help you, to remove you from that location. So not everybody thinks to do that. Sometimes people think that they have to stay at the frequency they're at. I had an experience, I think I shared it in the book, where I went astral in my bed and I turned and I saw a big old skeleton sitting in my desk chair. And inside his bones was prismatic light, just like a rainbow of colors there. And he stood up and he starts walking towards me. And I'm thinking, if that thing touches me, I'm going to die. And I was terrified. But my mentor told me, when you see things like that in your room, turn your back on it. I said, turn my back on it? It's going to get me. He said, the only way to move from that frequency to another one is to turn your back on it and think about something else. So with all the willpower I could muster, I flipped over in my astral state and left it behind. And suddenly everything was so open and everything was clear and everything felt better. And then I'm like, oh my God, I can go anywhere I want. I don't have to be at the mercy of whatever's waiting for me in my room to leave my body. And that's really when I took control of the whole experience. I eventually called myself Erin the Astral Vampire Slayer. This is before Buffy, because I would consciously go out after any low vibrational beings that were around the house or in the neighborhood or at a friend's house. And I would, quote unquote, vanquish them with my light sword and send them back where they weren't bothering other people. I started doing that like 3 or 4 times a week. So I got really good at it. And my house was always clear. And it was a lot of fun.
Well, that brings me to ask you both about your work. You're both dealing with energy and beings. And when you work with other people, is it about clearing out these beings and this energy that might be stuck on somebody? How would you describe it?
Yeah. In my work as an intuitive counselor, I'm mostly doing sessions with people regarding their career, health, relationships, finances, and stuff like that. But I do sometimes get people who have a paranormal problem or they have an energetic problem, and they will ask me questions about how to get rid of it or if I can get rid of it for them. And I do like to empower people to remove it on their own, because I can't be everywhere for everybody at all times. So I do try to empower people with some steps for clearing that energy for themselves. But largely my work is not oriented towards that. Scott, I think yours is a little bit. Is that correct?
Yes, it can definitely lead to that, depending on if it's what we're calling an entity, or a lot of times it's just an energy pattern that has taken a subtle consciousness. It can be a mindset pattern from your family that gets it stuck into your subconscious, and it becomes subtly conscious, like a cockroach, and then has to be asked to leave. Other times it can be lower dimensional beings or entities that are just hanging out, or that imaginary friend that you welcomed in when you needed them and then they never left. That's very common. I do several of these a week. And just to clarify and expand on Erin's point, I don't actually do them. I perceive them, and then I help the client through metaphor and different explanations purge them themselves. So I'm just the observer, and I will guide them how to get rid of it, but I prefer not to do it myself, because the efficacy of that, it doesn't last as long. If the client is involved, and not just involved, but if they do it themselves, then the entity itself knows that they're being defied. If I do it, they can come back if I'm not paying attention. I can't pay attention to everybody that I've worked with. So it's more effective to explain and really intrinsically have them understand what's happening, and then have them clear it. But it is sort of an exorcist energy.
Yeah, I tell my clients, if you find you have moldy cheese that's sitting out on the counter, you can't just cut the mold off and leave the cheese out. It's going to get moldy again. You have to put it back in the refrigerator. So I teach them how to, we remove the mold, and then we get that cheese back in the refrigerator so it doesn't spoil so quickly.
Nice metaphor.
And I've worked with Scott before, and it was immensely helpful for me. And, it was very visually based. And I think the more comfortable I became in my own visions and in my own imagination of what energy looks like, the better. And I guess everyone's unique. Everyone's got their own ways of imagining what energy looks like.
Well, you can't see me, but I'm nodding my head profusely, because yes, I'm in very much agreement with that. It's the reason why young children like to read books. I would rather read the book and then see the movie, because I don't want to know what color hair the character has from the casting director's standpoint or the director's standpoint. I want to create it in my own mind, or create that visual world in my own mind first. And that's why in my work, it's so important to evoke the childhood imagination. If you can align with your childhood imagination, particularly around the years that your subconscious was formed, you're going to be able to tap into that imagination and creation epicenter where they meet. And I think that the astral plane has a lot to do with this, even though I'm not quite adept at understanding it. Maybe Erin can speak to it a little more. But knowing, as you said, creating it in your imagination creates it somewhere. That means it exists already. And if you share that with something else or someone else or another energy, that makes it even more real, because it's being observed.
Yeah, actually, I also in my book, I talk about how these friends that I had, we were able to astral project together at the same time and be on the same frequency or plane. People ask me all the time, can you come and pull me out of my body? I have to know a person pretty well to match the same frequency that they're vibrating at. It would be difficult. But with my friends, we've spent so much time together. I knew their essence very well. And so we were able to have shared conscious astral experiences many, many times. It was very rewarding.
So just to clarify, that means if you, in your astral moments, wrote the number 834 down, you could tell each other the next day that 834 was the number that you had experienced
So
universally?
you have to write it physically. Like, so I did an experiment with somebody, and I said, write some kind of picture or symbol on your whiteboard at your apartment. And for 10 days in a row, he did separate pictures. For 10 days in a row, I tried to astral project to his house to look at the board. I knew that if I could see the board, I would see it correctly. And the first 9 days, nothing. I did not leave my body. But on the 10th day, I did. I was so excited. I flew right to his apartment, looked at the board because he had it nice and big. Make it big so people can see it. And when I came back, I told him the next morning what I saw on the board, and we were both blown away. This was his first foray into astral projection and proving that it's real. And I've done things like, fly to a friend's house, and I said, I know exactly what you're wearing at work today, and tell him exactly what he's wearing. I said, because I saw you walk out of your apartment wearing these clothes at 5:30 a.m. today. And he's like, well, you could have just guessed, but I didn't. I saw it. So some people don't want to think that they can be viewed at any time by an astral spy, so to speak, and I get it. That's something that you can do with your friends if they're all adept at this. But you'd have to write something, create something in the physical, and then go look at it astrally.
I hope you enjoyed today's episode, and be sure to check out part 2 of Another Dimension of Astral Projection to hear more of our conversation. I thank both Erin Pavlina and Mike Albo for being on today, and be sure to check out their books if these subject matters interest you, or if you have a young adult reader that these books may speak to. Thanks to Corey Tutt for the music you're listening to. In my private practice, I encourage people to heal what holds you back and feel better in your body. If you need more help with that process, I'm available for healing sessions by phone internationally. Visit scottclover.com for more information. Be well, and thanks for listening. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only, and solely as a self-help tool for your own use. I'm not providing medical, psychological, or nutrition therapy advice. You should not use this information to diagnose or treat any health problems or illnesses without consulting your own medical practitioner. Always seek the advice of your own medical practitioner and/or mental health provider about your specific health situation. For my full disclaimer, please go to scottclover.com/disclaimer.